Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Sheila Caldwell, Southern Illinois University Vice President of Anti-Racism, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and Chief Diversity Officer. And I would like to welcome all of you to today's conversation of understanding Black History Month in the era of policy pushback and erasure. From proclamation to practice, I'm celebrating Black History Month when identity months are under attack. Today's conversation is grounded in a critical and timely purpose to examine how Black history is being challenged, restricted, and in some cases erased through policy, practice, and public discourse. Across 2025 and today in 2026, we have seen a rise in legislation and institutional actions that limit how race, history, and identity can be taught in classrooms. State standards have restricted diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, and there have been challenges to the legitimacy of identity based observances like Black History Month. This conversation creates space to critically engage these realities, uplift lived experiences, and explore how we move beyond symbolic recognition to sustained and informed action. So, again, I want to thank you for joining this meaningful and necessary dialogue. And now I'm so pleased that we have our esteemed and distinguished panelists with us today, and I would like to take a brief moment to introduce them, their name, and their positions. And first, I want to start with the reason why we are actually having this conversation today with Mr. Marion Johnson. We're so glad that you are here and you're joining us. Marion Johnson is a first-year student at SIU Edwardsville. And he is a young man of many talents as a poet, artist, writer, performer, organizer, and coordinator. He currently serves as the Coordinated Oriented Digital Engagement Scholar, and that program is known as CODES on your campus. And he is also a research assistant for the Undergraduate Research and Creative Activity Center. So again, thank you, Marian, for joining us. Next, I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Tandra Taylor, and she currently serves as the Southern Illinois University Edwardsville Assistant Vice Chancellor for Educational Pathways and Community Engagement. She's also the Executive Director of the SIU E-Freedom School and does an outstanding job with that effort, and an Assistant Professor in the History Department at SIU Edwardsville. And I'm so grateful that we have an alum who has returned today, a renowned African American genealogist, Mr. Tony Burrows. We're so pleased to have you. Mr. Burrows has traced his generation and his ancestors for 7 generations on his mother's side. He met Alex Haley in 1969 and was influenced by Roots. Mr. Burrows has been quoted and featured in periodicals such as Time, People, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Chicago Defender, and the Chicago Sun-Times. So we are very much looking forward to learning from you to here today. Again, thank you for joining. And then last but not least, I'm very pleased that we have Dr. Pamela Smoot, who is really one of the pioneers of this conversation. It's really great to be able to brainstorm with colleagues and really say, hey, this is something that we need to speak to. Dr. Pamela Smoot is an assistant professor in the Department of History at the Southern Illinois Carbondale campus, and she specializes in African American history and archival administration. She is also a pioneer for the Southern Illinois African American Heritage Center, and her efforts center on preserving the memory and contributions of African Americans in Southern Illinois and beyond. And so again, I want to thank everyone here today in advance for your participation, for sharing your expertise and providing insights. I also want to thank everyone for joining us today on YouTube. Unfortunately, I do want to apologize that our chat feature is not working, but that does not mean we do not want to hear from you. We're very eager to hear your questions as you engage and learn from this esteemed group of panelists. So I would like to now introduce Ms. Doris Williams, who is our ADI project coordinator, and she will be hosting questions for today. So if you could think about jotting down her email just for a moment if you have any questions. Again, it's doris.williams@siu.edu, and that's DORIS period Williams, WILLIAMS at siu.edu. So again, please direct your questions to her email, and we would definitely have the opportunity to respond to your questions later on in our conversation. And so now I would like to really start this conversation and ground it why we find ourselves here today. And I'm going to start that conversation with our esteemed African American history professor, Dr. Pamela Smoot. And if you could share with us, Dr. Smoot, why do you think Black history is being reframed as divisive or controversial? What do you think is actually being challenged when those labels are placed on Black history? Is it history itself? Is it stories that are worthy of being considered and told? And in this moment, why do you believe there are active efforts to erase or minimize Black history? And then what also gives you the confidence that even though those efforts are taking place, that Black history will not be erased? So I know I gave you a lot to think about, but if you
Oh,
could
yes.
just take a few moments and really share from your expertise, your insights, your research, why you think this is happening at this particular time.
All right. I think this is happening at this particular time because many people have no knowledge of African American history. Then there are those who have maybe just a little bit of knowledge of African American history. But I think the bottom line is that there's a lack of understanding. It becomes controversial when people refuse to acknowledge that African Americans actually do have a history. It becomes controversial also when they refuse to understand that African American history does have a great deal of value. And it forces people to see the racism and discrimination and atrocities that African Americans have experienced. And they don't want to acknowledge that as well. Okay. But so it goes back to facing the realities of what has actually happened from African Americans since we, ended up on American soil. All right. And I think that every race and ethnicity has a story to tell if we're going to be inclusive. All right. But when we talk about African Americans, our story is worth telling because this country was built on the backs of our ancestors. All right. And by telling, African American stories, we have to go back to, we can go back to 1773 when folks started, we can start off with Phillis Wheatley. Okay. But then after that, you had all these biographies and autobiographies written by people like William Wells Brown, to tell these stories about African Americans. They're talking about their own personal experiences being an African American, right? Okay, and so our stories need to be told because they speak volumes about resilience that African American people have been able to, come back from all the atrocities that have been committed against us. And I also think that, our contributions need to be, presented to the world about what we have gone through and how we were able again to bounce back. All right. And then we want to set the record straight for all those non-believers who actually believe that we don't have a history. And then I get tired of people saying things like, oh, well, that was not my ancestors. I had nothing to do with any of that when we're talking about people who don't look like us, right? Okay, so we need to do this in order to continue to celebrate the achievements of African Americans.
Absolutely.
Okay, so why do I think there's an effort to erase or minimize African American history? Again, people don't want to face reality. All right, this current presidential administration has made it a point using an executive order number 14253 to restore truth and sanity to American history. All right, so at that particular point, I think that what he wants to do and the administration is to erase our history and to erase Black people, which will never happen. All right. So, and I think also it is an effort to end DEI. All right. And there's also an attempt to sanitize African American history. And you can't do that either because there are enough people alive, enough books and archives to let us know that you can't sanitize the history. It is what it is, whether you accept it or not.
Absolutely. Thank you. And you know what? I'm going to ask this too because I'm familiar with your work. Can you just
Mhm.
give us a snippet of some of the legislation that has been passed recently? Again, trying to sanitize and erase Black history. If you could just share a few of those numbers just to really help people understand the scope of what's happening, I think that would be helpful.
Okay, because there's been a movement to eliminate African American history, and there have been mostly Republican governors who are on board with eliminating this history. So we have a number of bills, some of which started in 2021, and they have since increased, okay, in this effort to limit or erase African American history, period. All right. So there have been bills in Alabama, there have been bills in Arkansas, There have been bills in Utah and Idaho and Iowa to end African American history, the teaching of African American history, or just basically limiting it. And one of the other things is that how they're trying to change the language, which is part of this. They don't want to use the word slavery, and voluntary servitude is, you know, to sanitize that whole issue of slavery. And so, and then just changing the language, or just for example, Medgar Evers'
Mhm.
brochure, his monument, whatever. They wanted to sanitize it by saying that the Beckwith was not a white supremacist. He was not a racist. He was
Mhm.
not a Klansman. All right. But you can't erase this history. But these bills are designed to actually destroy our history and the ability of our students in general, to learn about their history.
Absolutely. No, thank you for that. That gives context, right? That's really happening in those states and beyond. And like you said, even though we're addressing the current administration, these things happened before this
Yes.
particular administration took root, right?
Because
Um,
actually, I'm sorry. Actually, we can just go back to Uncle Tom's Cabin with Harriet Beecher Stowe. Folks did not want to see or to read that book, so that it was banned, particularly in the South, because it was telling about the story about a slave. And so that raised the increase in the number of abolitionists. But then those white Southerners were like, oh my God, she's trying to end Southern tradition and we have to stop this. So, that whole banning of books, flies right into this as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that history. And now I would like to really kind of open it up to the rest of our panelists. Dr. Taylor, as well as Marianne Johnson. She talked about what stories are being shared and valued. And I would like to ask you, how do you think we should respond to efforts that treat Black history as separate or optional? We've heard the phrase, we know the truth that Black history is American history, and that's essential to understanding who we are as a nation. So how do you think we should respond to these efforts to treat us as separate, as if we're not part of American history?
You know, there is an African proverb that I think gets right to the heart of this, and it goes, "Don't let the lion tell the story of the giraffe."
Mhm.
And for decades in the field of history, especially, we've had historians, the lions, if you will, tell very marginalized histories of African Americans. And so I'm thinking about my history books growing up in the 90s, right? So in US history, there were these little blurbs on the side of the page that really kind of try to highlight African American contributions to American history and society and culture. When in fact, when we start seeing more, I would say, honest historians, more historians of color, more Black historians enter the field, that conversation shifts. And you start seeing more of the history from the giraffe, if you will's perspective. And what we see in that shift is how central those once marginalized histories, literally living in the margins of textbooks,
Mhm.
become more central to the American experience. And I'm not just talking wars. In this country, we have a tendency to think about history as a succession, a timeline of wars. I'm also talking about everyday actions of everyday people, how that impacted American society. So I'm thinking about um, an event that may be more in my wheelhouse, which is the Great Migration, right? And
Mhm.
so you have a situation where between 1910 and 1970, over 6 million African Americans leave the South for cities in the West, the Midwest, and the North. And I don't think people realize how significant that movement is and how it's led by everyday people, right? It's a leaderless movement that changes the face of US cities. So if we think about the look and feel of our cities, how they are as they are, we cannot even understand where we are in terms of our spatial layout. We can't understand that without understanding the contributions and sacrifices of Black folks in this country.
Absolutely, Dr. Taylor. That was powerful and clarifying, right? Like where we find ourselves today, space, time, cities, right, is a direct result of the movement, right? Of
The
people.
music,
Yes.
the food, yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
Can I add to that?
Yes, please do, Dr.
Oh, I
Taylor.
just want just when Dr. Taylor was talking about, the little blurbs about African Americans in these textbooks, and I just wanted to say that, John Hope Franklin wrote the first African American textbook in 1947, and since then, we have at least maybe 12 different African American history textbooks that we can use now. Because I'm teaching modern America right now, and Booker T. Washington has 2 paragraphs. Ida B. Wells might have 1.5. So those textbooks, they fill the void or really tell the entire story about these Black folks.
Oh,
So I
absolutely.
just wanted to make a note about the textbooks, even though it's not just the textbooks that tell our stories.
I agree. I just want to add and say American history without Black history is a false and incomplete narrative. And so with that, I want to invite Mario into the conversation. Mr. Johnson, what are your thoughts on this? Uh, Black is history is separate and optional and not essential to the American story.
Some amazing points brought up by the other panelists, and I would like to add on from what you were saying. Yeah, so first and foremost, yeah, there is no America without African Americans. There is no 2026 America without, African Americans, without Black people. And yeah, so Black history is American history. And I believe first and foremost that we should respond to this alienation of American history by pushing engagement through initiative. We should not isolate our history, our culture, nor our traditions from others that aren't like us, but rather fight for and create spaces for our history, our culture, and our traditions to thrive, educate, and engage the minds of the population for what it truly is, was, and always will be.
Absolutely.
That's a representation of ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're counting on you to to continue to carry that torch too. So well said. And again, you have partners who are going to continue that work. So thank you for that, Marian. Mr. Burrows, we're talking about this context, and again, you being a genealogist, if you can share with us as you think about the historical and contemporary context, can you speak to why you think there has been resistance and pushback to erase Black history? We've talked about that a little bit, but what are your thoughts on like the motives and the philosophy behind this erasure that we see today?
Well, I think the motive, pure and simple, is racism. But I think the real question is, what have we done as a people to resist that pushback and erasure of Black history? Because we don't just want to concentrate on what the administration has done. We want to concentrate on what we have done and what we can do. So I think back to like the American Civil Liberties Union. They filed over 140 suits challenging executive orders. A lot of people don't know that. They're filing suits every day. Trump has faced over 600 lawsuits, losing in court over 70% of the time. We don't always hear that on television, but we need to understand when we have those victories and when he is defeated. Just in 2025, Trump lost 96% of his rulings in federal court. So the resistance is working, and we need to continue to resist. Trump had the National Park Service remove images and quotes of Harriet Tubman from the Underground Railroad website, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. You might have heard about him removing it. You might not be aware of the Underground Railroad National Park Service website, but they have a website dedicated to the Underground Railroad where they talk about resistance to slavery, and they document not only locations of quote, quote, Underground Railroad houses, but they also talk about those freedom seekers that resisted and ran away, those people that assisted them in escaping. And just recently, a new book came out, which I did a book review on for the National Genealogical Society, called Freedom Ship. And this author discovered that there was an Underground Railroad, not by land, but by sea.
Hmm.
And he found out that more people escaped on water than they did by land. And so this book, Freedom Ship, tells those stories of how freedom seekers left plantations, they got on vessels on the Atlantic Ocean and went north to freedom. So the Underground Railroad is very important. So we need to continue to tell those stories from the past as well as those new stories that are being uncovered. Trump has also used the National Park Service to remove an exhibit explaining George Washington's enslaved people at the
Mm.
house he lived at in Philadelphia when the capital was in Philadelphia. Well, the city of Philadelphia resisted and filed suit. And just this week, the judge ordered the National Park Service to replace the exhibit. So we need to continue to resist, and we resist all the time. Resistance in California got the National Guard out of California.
Mhm.
Resistance in Chicago got ICE out of Chicago. And resistance in Minnesota got the ICE out of Minnesota. So we need to continue to resist and celebrate our victories.
Absolutely. Well said. Thank you so much for that history. I think some of that we want to definitely document in the chat. The chat is now live. So for those of you who really have some burning questions for this group of experts, I would definitely encourage you to put those questions in there now. And Mr. Burrows, we really appreciate you sharing those facts because regardless of what names you mentioned, you shared facts. So I want people to keep that in front of mind, however they feel about the current administration. But what I also want to ask you, and I hope this is not too much of a curveball, but as a genealogist, what do you think are the implications of some of this erasure that's taking place today? You're tracking generations, you're tracking history, you're helping people remember, right? Without memory, people are lost. So can you tell us about that?
Well, when we do genealogy, we discover our ancestors, their birth, their marriage, their death, the events that they participated in. But you can't do genealogy without placing your ancestors into historical context. So
Mhm.
I always tell people you have to study history along with doing your genealogy, American history, Black American history, as well as local history. So when you try to erase that Black history and that American history, it gives us challenges to try to find out, well, why did my ancestor move from point A to point B? Why did they get put in jail? Why did they leave the South and come to the North? All that historical context is important to understand our ancestors and understand life and humanity. So, understanding history is extremely important to understanding our ancestors and where we came from and how we can look to the future.
Absolutely. Thank you. Just more reasons to preserve truth. We appreciate that.
Sure.
And Dr. Taylor, based on Mr. Burrows' points about history and resistance, what do you think the long-term consequences are for students, communities, and democracy when narratives, stories about Black life resistance and achievement are minimized or removed from public spaces and classrooms? You're teaching in classrooms now. What do you think the challenges and implications of that are?
What I find is I meet students um, from all different sorts of identities, backgrounds, and regions that they find themselves as college students without having had very much African American history. Many of them, um, I can count on them to know at least like five historical figures. Notably, Frederick Douglass is on that list. Um, Harriet Tubman is on that list. Martin Luther King Jr., of course, Rosa Parks. And five is a toss up, right? So sometimes it's Marcus Garvey, sometimes it's Malcolm X, but at least those four are always there on the list. Beyond that, they don't know much besides these, biographical snippets of historical icons. And it's my job in a classroom to broaden their scope and also let them know that there are historical actors, and Black folks who have been in pursuit of freedom for a very long time, right? Before the people that we know as our great leaders, and then after. Um, so that's my job to make them curious enough. I can teach what I can teach in my 15 weeks, But my goal is to plant so many seeds that after that class experience with me, they go on to make other connections and to continue their learning. And so that's what I can do in 15 weeks in a classroom. But in terms of my community work and working with communities, I mean, in that way, I'm still planting seeds as well, because when communities, again, all communities don't know African American history, what happens is they become more disconnected than they are, more polarized, right? And vulnerable to change and difference, which means vulnerable to the idea that another group that does not look like me, that does not represent my interest, so to speak, is a threat.
Mhm.
So it's important. I want to clarify, Black American history is not just important for Black American students
Absolutely.
or Black American communities. Everyone needs this information. Everyone needs this type of education, because without it, it becomes a threat to democracy. And then all of the hard won gains that were made during kind of what I would say like the high point of the civil rights movement, that then go on to benefit other groups, it gets chipped away, chipped away, chipped away. I think that one of the ways I've seen very effective in teaching African American history outside of the classroom is through a program that we do here at SIUE called SIUE Freedom School, where we work with elementary and middle school age children for over 6 week period in the summertime, and we read culturally relevant text. And it's, yes, some histories of enslavement, some histories of the Reconstruction era, but through a children's literature, age appropriate conversation. And young people feel so empowered when they're able to see themselves in history, even if the history is difficult or challenging. They see examples of overcoming, they see examples of perseverance, they see examples of resilience. That's important for youth development. And it's also important for adults to be reminded of those lessons of the history as well. And so I see the teaching of African American history especially important when it comes to empowerment and not feeling vulnerable.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So much food to think about from the wisdom that you just shared. I wanted to highlight that as we're talking about this conversation, SIU is not trying to erase Black history. We have professors, Professor Taylor, we have Professor Smoot. You can take their classes if you are students here. If you're not students, enroll so you can take their classes, right? So we are still teaching unvarnished tales here. And I think one other comment I just want to make before we move on to you, Dr. Smoot. Um, when you talk about the importance of everyone learning, it's one of the concerns I have about erasing Black history or anyone's history, because I've heard very similar things in other states where it relates to Native Americans as well, how their history is being erased and challenged. But it's like, what does it look like for the United States to really think about all the bloodshed and the resistance from a lot of Americans, right? It's not, so why are you erasing these stories when you have done a lot to course correct in some ways and try to get us back on path? We have examples of white Americans, of other Americans who are also indignant about injustice. And I bring that point up because, again, what is your true motive about, for example, not wanting to call Medgar Evers' killer a racist, or not putting that he was a part of the White Citizens Council when the court has already ruled that he was guilty? So again, we have to ask these type of questions, right? Like, are you trying to go back to something else? And if that's the motive for erasing it, because it's already been declared, the country has already apologized for slavery. They've done that. So we haven't forgot that they've done that, right? So we have to keep digging deeper and asking what the motivations are behind some of this erasure. But with that, Dr. Smoot, I would now like to ask you, as we're talking about these challenges and this erasure, let's switch to policy. So one of the things that we know is that there are policy reviews that are also driving some of this erasure. So can you tell us how historical reviews, that is the terminology, the verbiage that is being used, how do historical reviews at the federal level, at some of the state levels, function as a tool of erasure? And what does it mean when iconic Black figures in civil rights histories are subject to revision or silence? Can you share about that from a policy perspective?
Okay, from a policy perspective,
Yes.
I would say that, these policies are on the state and federal levels. And when we start talking about, the historical reviews, we're going back to sanitizing this history. All right. So when we talk about these historical reviews, we're talking about, the statues, the many historic markers that are placed about Black folks all across this country. We're also talking about, uh, different sorts of different, can't find the right word for me. But anyway, going back to the policies and the markers and everything, got to go through there. And we have to make sure that the history is correct while they continue to change the history, change the verbiage, change everything. And it's just not going to work. I think that, because we have living, walking, and talking people who know the history of our communities, know the history of our families, know the history of just about everything. I think that it's important that we um, tell these stories in such a way that they have an impact on everybody. Um, and once again, um, when we talk about these historic icons, particularly during civil rights movement and changing the language and everything, one of the things that I believe in is photographs. These folks want to go around here and change what's on the marker. Look, when you put the marker up, boom, I already took a picture of that marker. So if you go back and you decide that, we need to make some changes, it's like, this is what really happened right here. I think that's extremely important. We need to do that. And I think that, when we talk about these icons, we need to talk about, we need to have workshops to talk about these people. We also need to, share these family stories. We need to take these kids on field trips. Dr. Taylor was talking about the things they do with the Freedom School. And so I think that those are some of the things that we need to do. People need to run for positions on these school boards. And I also think that these tools of erasure are criminal,
Hmm.
and it should not happen at all. And I think that, we need to continue to fight. Mentioned about the situation over there in Philadelphia where these people were, taking down the panels related to George Washington and the slaves not being mentioned in the historical part of the panels, right? So one of the things that they did was they organized. I think we need to organize. And I think that in Philadelphia, they had these organizations called Avenging the Ancestors Coalition. And they are out here fighting, resisting, you know, these um, these tools that these policies that the governments are inflicting upon us right now.
Absolutely. I like that. I think we should all join that, avenging the ancestors.
Yeah, and it's the attorney's name is Michael Corden. He's like the founder of Avenging the Ancestors Coalition in Philadelphia.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that. And you gave us a lot of good strategies and tips, right? Because we're
Mhm.
not powerless, we're not helpless
Right.
as we see these things. Everybody can do their part to preserve history, to preserve the truth, and to not have our history and our memory erased. So thank you for
Okay,
that.
okay. I wanted to also add something else about, resisting. And one of the things that we need to do is to also, run for positions on school boards so that we can kind of control that narrative, because that's one of the ways in which people have been able to ban books.
Yeah.
These people on these school boards banning books and also making decisions about what's going to be taught or
The
what should
curriculum.
not be taught as well.
Yes. That's an excellent recommendation, and that's what you can do in your community, right, to make sure that the truth is being preserved. When Dr. Taylor talked about the age group for Freedom School, we have to start early. And I think from me being a leader in DEI, and again hearing like the 5 historical figures that most students learn about, we already see that the education system, as it relates to teaching about Black history, is woefully inadequate. And so it could be quite frightening to think that students might not even hear about those 5, even though that's not sufficient, right? But to inspire curiosity and to instill desire for students to want to learn more. That's so important for lifelong learning. So yeah, again, thank you for that, because if we can have representation on those schools boards, we can make sure that's another avenue for students to learn early and often. We talked about policy, and Mr. Burrows, I want to shift to you. And if you could talk about what students can do. We talked about, again, we got some tips from Dr. Taylor, from Dr. Smoot, but from your perspective, as we have approximately 22,000 students across SIU campuses, across 66 regions, what are some of the things that students can do to resist pushback and erasure on Black history?
Great question, and thanks for asking. I think the first thing students need to realize is the fact they have power. They're not powerless. Oftentimes they feel they're powerless, but they have tremendous power. One of the things they need to do is join movements. When they see something happening and there's a movement going on to resist it, join those movements, participate, be active in it, study current events, read the news, watch the news, understand what's going on in your community as well as in the nation. One of the other things they can do is take Dr. Smoot's classes, learn about Black history, learn the things that happened in the past and how they affect the current day. So they need to resist at every opportunity. Look at the ways that the community has been resisting and see how you can participate and celebrate that resistance. The other thing they can do is to understand that digital life is ephemeral. Websites today may not be up tomorrow. So that is not permanent. We still need physical archives. You need to think about your experience at SIU and preserve your experience. Save your flyers, save your letters, save your posters, any kind of physical things that come across you while you're at SIU, save those things. When you take those photos, either with your camera or with your phone, you need to label those photos. You know who the people are, but once those photos get transferred, who will know the names, the dates, the places, and events? You need to document those images. You also need to download those photos from your phone to your computer and make them permanent. I've talked to so many people that lost their phone or their operating system for their phone got cut off. They had to change carriers and they lost all their data. Make backups of your data. Also, think about keeping a diary or a journal of your experiences. What you're doing today will be very important tomorrow, and memory is very fleeting. You remember what happened yesterday or the week before, but will you remember that 5 years, 10 years down the road? Think about recording your experiences. We're in the process right now of creating a Black Archives in Morris Library. This is for Black students, alumni, faculty, and staff. We want to make sure there's a permanent archives so people know that Black people were at SIU and they made accomplishments after they left SIU. You'll hear more about this in the current future, but think about that as you're going through your daily life at SIU. Also, you want to support Black organizations on campus and take, again, other Black history courses in addition to Dr. Smoot's courses, and buy Black history books. Buy those books because once they're in your library, you can keep them for the future. So there's many things that you can do. Don't think that you're helpless. There's many things you can do.
Yeah, and you gave us many things. That was like a class really on how to properly document. And so I just want to say for those who are listening, this is the reason why we record this. Some people might have captured that, some may have not. I personally am going to go back and I'm going to listen to what you said so we can really make sure that we're not just listening. It's not enough for us to listen to the things that are being said. If we don't actually put this wisdom into action, things will be lost. So I'm really hoping that we are not just absorbing these tips, but we're really thinking about our parts and what we can do to execute as we listen to the insights and perspectives today. Marian, Mr. Johnson, I want to turn to you because you are a student, right? You have agency. You're the expert as we talk about students here. So what are some of the, I just wanted you to hop into the conversation and think about what are some of the things you think your peers can do, even building on what Mr. Burrows said.
Okay, students alike. Um, I feel as though the class of 29, we are one of the largest classes coming into college in a really long time. Um, but what's special about us is not just our number, of people coming in, but the number of people that are getting involved and making change. One of the biggest things I can say is since I started during the summer, I got to be on campus a bit earlier, and it got me to understand things and make some connections. And from there, I would say I made a lot of friends. And one of the biggest things you can do as a student with a lot of friends is talk to them, get to understand them, and help them, get them to essentially get involved like that. That's the easiest thing you can do. Um, because a lot of times, oftentimes when people aren't involved, it's not necessarily that they don't want to, they just don't know what's going on. That's one of the biggest things. People oftentimes just stay in their room. Getting people involved is as easy as telling them to come. It's as easy as that. But it has to be built upon that friendship and that trust. There has to be an affinity there. Yeah, so first and foremost, I don't want to say too much because I already had things I want to say later on when I
Yeah.
ask my questions. But yeah, there's things that I have done already. Um, and like I say, I've influenced a lot of my friends to do things. I'm in a completely different organization, but there's a Black Student Union here on SIUE campus. And I have some very close friends that are in leadership committees regarding that. And they've been doing some things, and they plan on doing many more things. And yeah, the biggest way that you get involved on campus and do more, be more, see more is simply showing up and taking interest. That's all.
Excellent. Yeah.
Can I
That's why
add?
you're here, right? It's about the relationship building. I mean, it's good to read, it's good to know history. I mean, all that's very important, but most colleges go out of their way to make sure the students are in a rich, abundant environment with diverse professors, with diverse students, and it is a huge miss to not take advantage of the human resources that college provides outside of the classroom, right? So I definitely want to affirm what you said. I mean, I really feel like that is like the one of the major reasons you come to college. If it's just about class, you can now do that online. You really want to have those relationships, and that's why again want to curate environments where students can be exposed to diverse others, build those relationships, get those firsthand testimonies and experience from their peers. So again, thank you for highlighting that. And we talked about policy, we've talked about student agency, and Dr. Taylor. Now I want to talk about institutional responsibility. You know, as we both are administrators at its prospective campuses, can you tell us how educators, leaders, and institutions, what should they be doing to protect the integrity of Black history while navigating laws and policies that restrict curriculum as well as public interpretation? So what is our responsibility as we navigate some of these murky waters?
I think our first responsibility to protect Black history is to ourselves have an awareness of it. One of the things I'd like to affirm came from both Mr. Burrows and Mr. Johnson in terms of like highlighting like student power. As institutions, we should be aware of that. So I'm thinking about there was this one exhibit I worked on once, 1968, the year that rocked the world. And one of the ways 1968 rocked the world was through student movements um, across the country, on campuses across the country. And so that moment always comes back to me when I think about what should institutions be doing. For one, we should be doing whatever we need to do to not have another 1968,
Mm.
right? Where we have um, particular moments of unrest, campuses led by students. But one of the things that came out of that movement was Black studies, right? The reason we're able to have a Black history curriculum comes out of that moment, comes from students demanding we want to learn about ourselves. And so I think that that should be protected. So particular protections around curriculum, you mentioned Dr. Caldwell here at SIU, there is still a commitment to making sure that those courses are protected and still offered. So that's one, like continuing to do that. But also, when I think about co-curricular opportunities and extracurricular opportunities that in a way also offer protections for Black history, even if it's something like a commitment to a Black history calendar of events, right, for the month of Black history that involves some scholarly discourse, but also some creative opportunities that highlight across a range of different modalities the contributions made by Black Americans living in this country. I think that another thing that institutions could do is partner with other organizations whose missions align with protecting and preserving Black American history. One of the projects that I'm involved in is a statewide initiative called the Journeys to Justice Project, and it's where I collaborated with other Illinois professors, and we organize communities in Springfield, Chicago, and East St. Louis, and we go to the Equity Justice Initiative, the EJI, in Montgomery, Alabama. And that's an institution, an organization that does an excellent job at preserving African American history from the period of enslavement to their narrative arc goes from the period of enslavement to the era of mass incarceration, which is now. And so even if institutions don't have all the tools, all the capacity to continue to, focus like significantly on African American history, partner. So it's the same advice Mr. Burroughs is offering to students. Organize yourself, find like people who are passionate about certain causes. So it's the same thing. So institutional partnering with institutions that are doing work that students, community members, and even from a professional development standpoint, there are gains to be gotten through other institutions that may have a particular focus, a particular strength that we may not have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that collaboration is so important for sharing all of those resources and bringing us and making us aware of things that we might not be aware of that's taking place in Illinois as a part of the resistance, as a part to ensure that erasure does not take root. And I think one other thing that is really important while we're resisting this erasure is because we don't want another 1968. And I think for other people, they can put some other years in there as well. Very tragic things that have happened. And again, the narrative, if you don't know history, you're bound to repeat it. And we don't want to repeat some of the horrors of the past. So thank you for illustrating that. We have time for a few more questions. And for those of you who put in comments in the chat as well as questions, we definitely are going to get to those in a few moments. So please hang tight, and we thank you for adding those. I think we shared about some of these things, but I want to come to Mr. Johnson again, and I want us to think about, we've talked about different variables as we're having this conversation, but if we could now share like collectively about the power, the voices, the experiences, how can storytelling, lived experiences, and community voices serve as acts of resistance against historical erasure and policy pushback in this current administration? We acknowledge that some of these things started before this current administration, but we definitely see a wrapping up and we see a very strong commitment to, seeing these things rapidly deteriorate. So let's talk about that. Storytelling, lived experiences, community voice. We've shared about that, but what are some additional things that we can do to ensure that these things can be used to really create pushback against this administration? Mariam, what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so storytelling, lived experiences, and community voices serve as acts of resistance against erasure and policy pushback, not only in this current administration, but through the many millennia of Black erasure in America, by giving the most raw, untampered, and unrestricted truths directly to the youth and others of interest in society. I would like to add that I am directing a truth-telling series in later March and early April of this year with some accomplished African-American women professors. I believe that these events serve to build stronger community through intimate connections with role models who could pass on certain ideas and lessons pertaining to real world issues that the many, attending could learn from.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And so, can you, we want to definitely put those dates in the chat. So can you share, with us, even if it's not today, we want to definitely make sure that we augment your voice and that we learn from you. So we really want to be a part of that Truth Telling series. So thank you for leading, facilitating, and sharing that with us. Other panelists, what are your thoughts on storytelling, lived experiences, and community voices?
Well, I would like to say that we need to understand in terms of storytelling and lived experiences is that today's events are tomorrow's history. What we do today is history tomorrow. So we live Black history each and every day. Many of us, our peers, our parents, our friends, were active through the Jim Crow period, the Great Migration, the Civil Rights Movement, and the Obama years. Trump cannot erase our memories. It is up to us to record those memories as much as possible in as many different ways as possible. We need to interview our parents, interview our peers, and record our own stories on audio, on video, on notebooks and notepads, and record those stories. As you all know, this week, Reverend Jesse Jackson died. I posted online this week after he died a photo I had with him at the Poor People's Campaign in Washington, D.C. in 1968. Little did I know then how important that photograph would be. That's a part of history and my memories of that date. Donald Trump is not getting my photo. Okay. So Dr. Taylor, you're right, talking about 1968. There were a lot of uh, trauma in 68, and there were a lot of struggles in 68 as well. You mentioned about the Black history movement. I was part of the movement at SIU to get Black studies in 68 and 69. So you're very, very correct. We need to record our stories and get the stories from our relatives.
Absolutely. Because we're Black history, right? We're talking about it as if we're not
Absolutely.
Black history. But everybody on this call, like you said, we're living in times right now, and that's going to be our story tomorrow. So it's very important, like you said, that we have our own way to account and record. So thank you for that. I'm gonna
Can
go
I
ahead.
add
Yeah.
really quick? That was amazing. Everything that you said, Rose, was amazing. I would like to add that um, so I have a personal mentor that I met during the summer. His name is Howard Ramsey. He's been at SIUE for about 20 years. He's very accomplished. And from him, I got to meet Dr. Treasure Redmond. She actually just recently told me I had a meeting with her. She's going to be one of the, this is kind of a spoiler, she's going to be one of the speakers for the Truth Telling series. And she told me about what Rose just said, of how everyone sort of stormed down the administration to get Black studies at SIUE. So I would like to say that, yeah, this goes back into my point, which we're also speaking about is, like these intimate storytelling, getting to intimately bond with role models and learn from them. It's something that cannot be replaced. It's something that is extremely powerful, and with the right people, it will sit with them forever. And one more thing, there's a poem written by Robert Hayden called Frederick Douglass, and I live by it every day, and it goes by like not by the lives, like so like it'll his ideas will carry on through the lives of others. And that's something that I believe we should keep in mind, or at least I should keep in mind as me and my cohort should keep in mind as we continue to do things for African Americans and our culture. And I used to, yeah, I just wanted to say that.
No, excellent. No, and you talked about role models, but I just want to say you're also a role model for your peers. The way you are, gathering your circle of intellectual giants right, who really you can learn from. I think again, the work you're doing is a great example, and we appreciate your leadership. So thank you so much for that, Marianne. We have I'm looking at the time. We have a few more questions, but Marianne, I want to maybe to get one more final thought from you before I turn it over to Dr. Smoot and we respond to our last question. But this is about a question of courage, and I know even as we were gathering today, we talked about how courage is so important in this moment, that we do not shrink back, right? Even as we're being threatened from some very high places, but it's important that we stand our ground because we are on the right side of history. So if you could talk to us about what does courage look like for individuals, for students, for organizations who are committed to equity when their identities, their histories are under attack, how does that translate? What does courage look like when it's embodied into action, when it's an actionable strategy? Can you share about that, Marian?
Okay, so before I get into what I actually wrote down, this is a really good question. I really like that. This is one that I wrote the most for. And I would like to shed some light on who I am as a person, and how I got here, essentially. Um, I really like to exercise and work out, and part of that is the sort of the feeling of breaking down, and how hard it really gets. And that's when you remember that a lot of it is mental. And a lot of it is you having to change your perspective in order to persevere and grow. And with that being said, so what does courage look like to individuals and organizations committed to equity when identity focused histories are under attack? So this courage looks like an unrelenting passion, outreach, and outcry. This courage looks like keeping the ideals, goals, passions, traditions, cultures, and people alive through ourselves. I'll shed some light on what I and some others have done on campus and what we plan to do. So, I'm president of the Code Student Association at SIU. I collaborated with Poetic Flow, also at SIU. The advisor is Howard Ramsey. And last Friday, we held a Valentine-themed poetic spoken word event, and it comprised of live singers, rap artists, singers, a live band, and of course, poetry slam artists. The event itself was a success and inspired many people to get into not just poetry, but the entire atmosphere of African American literature and culture. Um, this was the first event of that caliber that I fully organized, coordinated, and also hosted myself. Um, and there's much more I plan that my organization, and I have planned for the future. With that being said, being that change we wish to seek, taking the initial step towards your goals and inspiring others to make a change so that the cycle never ends. No longer will we fight to reset the status quo. We will flip society on its head through engagement, activities, and activism. That's how courage translates into collective action. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well said. Excellent. Excellent way to end the conversation. Again, we feel hopeful, right? You're inspiring our hope having you here today. So thank you for those closing comments. But that's the call of the hour for all of us, courage, right? And you just shared eloquently how we can translate that into action. We have one question specifically directed to Dr. Smoot and again, I want to thank those who've joined us on YouTube today. But the question is, if you can speak to the impact on all students of history when they learn about African American history in our region or nationally. And I think we actually already had that question in mind. So that's a perfect question. If you could speak to that, Dr. Smoot.
You want to know what the impact is?
Yes, the impact on all students of history when they learn about African American history in our region or nationally.
Okay, the impact of African American history, what it does is, just for example, people think that African American history and American history are two separate fields. And one of the things that I tell the students that I have encountered is if you're going to teach American history, you need to know African American history as well, because they are like hand in glove. You cannot really effectively do one without the other. Okay, the impact also has to do with, in terms of my students in this region and elsewhere, is that, we have stories to tell. All right. And we need to be able to tell those stories in different kinds of ways. Like oral history is extremely important. All right. As Mr. Burroughs has said, we need to record almost everything. And so I encourage my students to do the same, because oftentimes when I'm in class, I tell stories about my family history and how important it is. And like, where I grew up, I created an oral history program with all of those people that I grew up with. So we have stories to tell. And I hate to be morbid or anything, but one of my friends had passed, but I had a oral history interview that I had done with her. and I had it transferred from a cassette to a CD, and I had it copied and passed it out to all of the families so that they could know their family history and to know about how, that person grew up. So, but, the impact is great. And I think that history is important, even though a lot of people don't like history, but it tells all sorts of stories. And if we don't tell our stories, who will?
Absolutely. And I have a similar story. My father passed away in May of 2017. And it was after I read The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson. There was a character named Mary in the book who grew up in Mississippi. And a lot of her stories reminded me of my father, and it actually helped me fill in some gaps. And I didn't know he was going to pass away in May, but in December, I just recorded him on my phone, asking about his experience in Mississippi. And every year when his birthday happens in September, I will just kind of pull up that recording to hear his voice and kind of listen to his story. So we can all do that. And that's just another example of preserving history and keeping our loved ones close and knowing that other people can't come in and really kind of alter or distort that history because we have it and we know it for ourselves. This has been such an amazing and rich conversation. I really don't want it to end. And I'm very grateful for all the people who've joined. I do want to share a few comments before I make my closing remarks. So we have the Special Collections Research Center at SIU Carbondale, and I'm sure we have a similar one at SIUE. But if you have materials that you would like to preserve, Special Collections Research Center is willing to help you do that. So again, another resource to preserve history. Dr. Burrows, there was a comment made. As a society, people need to become literate in all aspects. So they were really reinforcing just the different aspects because it's not just about one discipline. Marian talked about poetry and how we can represent history and arts and Black poetry. It's in math, it's in science. So it's not limited to just history. We can see ourselves throughout all its aspects. And then one more comment about someone else really appreciating the Avengers and the context of Marvel. So we're all going to fight this scene together. So again, thank you to those who joined on YouTube. I want to thank our panelists again. Your insights, your wisdom, and just your encouragement was amazing. Again, you gave really great tips and strategies, and I'm hoping that we can actually act on those strategies because that's how we're going to preserve our history and resist pushback. For those of you who continue to participate in Conversations for Understanding, we really appreciate that. And even though Identity Months are under attack, we're going to continue to still celebrate Identity Months here at SIU. And March 17th, we will be celebrating women. So we encourage you to come and join us for our next Conversation of Understanding next month, March 17th. So please meet us here. And then until next time, my final remarks, the words of Carter G. Woodson, ancestor and author of The Miseducation of the Negro, who said, "If race has no history, if it has no worthwhile tradition, it becomes a negligible factor in the thought of the world." And we do not want to be negligible factors. We know we are not. And so again, another reason why it is essential that we preserve Black history, all history that is being erased. Thank you and enjoy.